Welcome to Perpetual Motion, where we learn, grow, and keep it moving with meaningful conversations that matter. I'm your host, Dr. Mo Anderson, and today I'm joined by a powerhouse in the world of persuasion and storytelling. There he is, Mr. Neil Gordon. He is a renowned messaging strategist. Who knew that was a job? Editor and the author of the fascinating Fable. Fable, y'all, the most powerful sentence of all time, the most powerful sentence of all time. He's worked with best-selling authors, influencers, and thought leaders to help them distill complex ideas into messaging that truly moves people. And I'm reading his book. I love it. Today, we're discussing it and his signature silver bullet technique and the art of speaking so people not only hear you, but they feel you. Can you feel me? I can't wait for you to hear from Neil Gordon. Welcome to the show, Neil Gordon.
Well, thank you, Mo.
Let's just jump right in. I'm looking forward to talking about your fable, the most powerful sentence of all time.
Yeah.
Without giving too much away, what inspired you to write it as a fable instead of a traditional guide or professional development book?
Going all the way back to the 2000s when I worked in book publishing, when I was an editor at Penguin, I had some exposure to fables or parables in various contexts, including reading The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho for the first time.
Yeah,
And
one of our favorites.
yeah, it's one of my favorites too, honestly, Mo. And toward the end of my time at Penguin, a business fable came across my desk that we wanted to bid on, but because of the nature of the way Penguin wouldn't allow divisions to bid against each other, the business imprint at Penguin wound up getting it. It's called The Go-Giver.
Okay.
And it's gone on to sell over 1 million copies. Since this was back in 2007, since then it's sold over 1 million copies. But more significantly for me, it really impacted me. And what I have believed in the years since is that a fable, if it's done in a way where we get emotionally invested in the characters, it's not just kind of a plastic, generic cookie cutter kind of character, but someone we could relate to, then it helps us to get even more emotionally invested in the message or messages of the book. And it is more likely to stick with people. And because I have a background in storytelling and was an editor of fiction and have done all sorts of narrative writing over the years, I just found myself called to create the kind of book that people could not only learn from, but get emotionally invested in so that they actually took the lessons to heart.
Right. Love that. Love that. That's important. And really, you do want to engage people as a speaker and a writer, which we share so often. I see people, it seems like they're so intent on trying to impress others with how much they know,
Right.
as opposed to presenting information in a way that's going to resonate with them, that they can engage with. So that is so important. You're known for the silver bullet technique. I know the silver bullet as, what you kill vampires with, but how does it work in presentations? What is it? And why would you use it to persuade or inspire an audience?
This actually relates to what you just said, Mo, in that you spoke to how people think they need to impress others with how much they know. And so what typically happens, let's think of this, the silver bullet technique is applicable to many aspects of one's expertise and thought leadership. However, one of the most concrete ways we can relate to its value is through public speaking. Whether it's a TED-like talk that's 10 to 15 minutes long, or it's a full keynote that's 30, 45, or 60 minutes, whatever that might be, what most speakers do is what we could call the show up and throw up, which is what you're talking about. It's you go up there and you vomit as much information as you can. And you do this because you believe that the more information you provide, the more value you provide. But people aren't robots. They're not just machines that can absorb as much information as you throw at them. We're emotional beings. We're emotional creatures. And the most effective talks are going to be a strategic interplay of the intellectual stuff, the information, the statistics, whatever it might be, and also the stories and the space to digest something. And perhaps most significantly, the ability to anticipate a really valuable insight. the idea that there is a solution, there is one thing that's going to change our lives. And that's where the silver bullet comes in. It's this way of packaging an idea in a single sentence. That's why the fable is called the most powerful sentence of all time, because there's this one way to convey an idea that when people hear it, they light up, they get this epiphanous kind of light bulb type of moment. They often get chills. And when we strategically place that in our talk, instead of the show up and throw up, we just provide just enough information to get us to that big idea. We reveal the idea like a climax in a movie, and then people get it and they internalize it. And that's what convinces them to go further with it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And when we had our pre-call, I shared with you my tagline, which is change your words, change your world.
Right.
And you said that was a form of what you're referencing. And I didn't know it. It's just, I work really hard with my marketing and branding people, but I am a words person. And I truly believe that. I'd love to know what, I'm sure you have multiple silver bullets. I'd love to hear one of yours around your branding, your business.
Well, when we look at the silver bullet itself, it's funny. A long time ago, Mo, when I was just learning I was just figuring out this technique and I was just observing the patterns, and I gave a workshop on it, and it went really poorly because at that time I didn't have a silver bullet about silver bullets. And so I had a lot of egg on my face because it's like, I wasn't walking my talk, and I knew I wasn't, and it was embarrassing. And the funniest thing is that 2 days later, I was taking a shower and suddenly it came to me. It was just like the brain was working on it for a year and a half, and I go out and I do it and it bombs. And then I realize what it's supposed to be. And the realization I had in the shower is that the flawed assumption around thinking that the more information we provide, the more value we provide, right? The counterpart to that is to not make your talk or anything that you say to be persuasive. It's not to provide information. It's not to provide knowledge, but rather it's to convince people that change is possible. I realized it was about belief. And so when I'm teaching about a silver bullet, the silver bullet for silver bullets is people are empowered, not by that which they know is true, but rather that which they believe is possible.
Oh, beautiful.
Right.
Nice.
And as soon as you get people to believe that change is possible, then they'll move forward. Then they'll say, oh, I want this, or I want to do this. And then they buy your book at the back of the room, or they buy your course, or they want to hire you as a speaker themselves, or anything like that. Anything that compels them to go deeper. But it's not a manipulative, salesy thing. You're legitimately empowering them to see the possibility of change. And whether they work with you or not, they still have a recipe for moving forward.
Right. Beautiful. I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
One of your specialties, Neil, is helping people craft an elevator pitch. And we hear this so much if you work with any type of business strategist or whatever your coach, somebody's going to talk to you. What's your elevator pitch? What's your elevator pitch?
Right.
But you talk about one that gives people chills in 20 seconds. Can you walk us through how someone might begin to do that? And I'm not sure if it's the same as the silver bullet or if we're talking about something different now, honestly. So make sure I'm clear on that.
Oh, of course. All right. Well, we can again start with the flawed typical way that most people do a silver bullet. Do an elevator pitch. When we're doing an elevator pitch, it's often because we're at some sort of networking event or some kind of situation, maybe even just a casual party where someone asks us what we do. And our task is to concisely convey what we do in maybe 30 seconds or so. What most people do is answer the question. People ask, what do you do? And say, oh, well, I'm an engineer, or I'm CEO of this company, or I am an accountant, or I'm a lawyer, or whatever it is. The idea here is to instead of just pitching people on your value, provide them with a way to solve a problem, and then at the end, describe what you do. What this looks like is it's basically in 4 parts. When someone asks, what do? You can start with something that sets up the problem. The first part is some sort of problem that you solve or that people care about solving. Let's just use a basic one like smoking and quitting smoking.
Okay.
someone asks, what do you do? And instead of saying, oh, well, I help people quit smoking, you say, you know how hard it is to quit smoking, right? You just start with the problem. And they're like, well, yes, of course. And then the second part is speaking to the flawed typical solutions that people usually go through. So you know how hard it is to quit smoking? Yeah, of course. And usually what we do is we vape, or we use nicotine patches or nicotine gum or this or that.
Right.
Right? Yeah. And I know someone who tried all of those things and none of them worked.
Okay.
And then the third part to your question earlier is, of course, the silver bullet. The reason why people are getting chills after 20 seconds is that you set them up with a problem. You've described and provided further context on why typical flawed solutions don't work. And then you hit them with the solution that does work, where you say something like, the key to quitting smoking is not mitigating the addiction, but rather, and maybe there's some other thing that you could do. Like perhaps maybe your solution is helping people to be more meaningfully connected with others and mitigate the need for the sense gratification or something. I don't know. I'm just making that up. I'm not an expert in. But so the key to this is not managing your nicotine addiction, but rather immersing yourself in meaningful connection. Okay. That's the solution. That's the recipe. That's the silver bullet. And then describe. So what I do is I help people struggling to quit smoking to finally eliminate that habit and live a much healthier lifestyle moving forward. Something like that. So it's 4 parts. The reason why they get chills at 20 seconds is because you've given them that one sentence solution that's going to solve all their problems. And that gives them that dopamine hit, and it really convinces them that change is possible because they're not going to keep doing the flawed stuff that most people do.
I like that. And starting with the problem helps them connect as well. I hadn't heard anyone say to do that before. It's always, I do this, this, and that. But the problem I solve, which is what we talk about all the time, is left out. So I'm implementing that immediately. Thank you.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
You say the first 7 seconds of a speech can make or break the connection with your audience. What should speakers focus on in those critical opening seconds?
This recalls what we were exploring earlier around how humans aren't robots. Right. And they're not going to just absorb as much as you throw at them. They're emotional creatures. We're all emotional creatures. And when a speaker, and this is specifically in the context of a live talk, there are a lot of virtual talks, which I recommend a slightly different approach to the opening of a virtual talk. But for a live one where you're there in front of people and it's formal, you've been introduced by a host or an MC, and people applaud as you walk out onto the stage. In this case, there is tension at the beginning of a talk, much like there's tension right before the gun goes off at the beginning of a race. Nothing has happened yet. And so that tension pervades the room among everyone. What most speakers do in those opening seconds is that they visit with the audience. The people applaud and they say, oh, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. How about a round of applause for whoever just introduced them? Or hasn't this been a great event? Or whatever it is. They ingratiate themselves. They want to be liked. So it's understandable. But people are not there to like the speaker. They're there to solve a problem. They're there for change. And so instead of visiting and trying to be liked, go out and ride that wave of tension to draw them in even more intensely. So the way that looks is you walk out on stage, maybe look at the audience for a moment just to acknowledge them, and then just start with a powerful opening line. It could be very simple. It could be something as simple as, I was fed up with the zero in my bank account, or something like that. Or I looked down at the scale and realized with horror how much weight I had gained. Something like that. Something that just gets them into a story right away. And if people have their phones out, if they're kind of tuned out, and then they hear someone just go right in and ride that tension, what's going to happen is they're just going to track something is not quite right. This isn't typically what I'm supposed to be experiencing. And that incongruity is going to draw them in and get them invested in hearing what happens next.
Gotcha. You just gave me a flashback, not to make this about me, but I'm over my shoulder. You can see me at my TEDx talk. And as we're waiting, I was watching from behind stage, and there was this one guy in the front row that was so not interested in everybody. He was on his
Yeah.
phone just,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
think he
yeah.
was tweeting the moment, just didn't want to be there like his wife had dragged him there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that's who my eyes went to when I came out. And I said, I began with, "Do I look scary to you?" And his head just snapped up because
Snapped
he
up
was
like that.
not
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
expecting this little teeny black woman to come out and say, "Do I look scary to you?" And I didn't have the science or psychology behind it like you, but I know from my experience as a speaker that if you start with something like that, as opposed to 20 minutes of "I'm so glad to be here, thank you CEO," blah blah blah,
Yeah,
it makes people pay attention. So
that's
I
right.
love the way you put it, though. I'd never thought about what was behind it. I just knew the impact of it.
Well, I appreciate that your instincts were to do that, Mo, because so often we see people going in the other direction.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. And I have to say too, though, I do a lot of speaking to Christian groups and
mhm.
corporate groups and other things. So it's a fine line when you are talking, because like in the Baptist church, you really do have to start with acknowledging everybody. That's expected. That's the tradition. If nobody else, the pastor. And so I think it's important that you also know the culture, because some of our speakers, a lot of our listeners are corporate and business, but some are speaking at
Mm.
civic groups and other places.
Mhm.
So how do you balance that if there, I mean, certain expectations or traditions? Do you just ignore that, or what would you say to someone in a little different environment?
First of all, Mo, I do believe that we as speakers need to honor the context of where we're speaking.
Hmm.
The device that I just described works really well if you're in this proscenium theater and it's with proper professional lighting and there
Hmm.
are hundreds of people in the seats and all of that. That's a very formal setting.
Right.
When you're giving a workshop with 30 people and it's completely a sunlit room and it's just kind of casual,
Hmm.
yeah, I wouldn't formalize the opening in that way. And you might even just engage with them and talk to them directly. If there are certain procedures, if there are certain things that are expected,
Hmm.
then it's important to, at least to me, to not flout those expectations, because what that does is it makes the story about how you're undermining the culture as opposed to whatever it is you're saying.
Mm.
And I remember one time when I was speaking at this nonprofit conference and I was expected to put up learning objectives at the beginning because
Right.
the creator of the event said the reason for that is so that people know they're in the right room. And I hate learning objectives at the beginning of a talk because it takes all the curiosity out of the thing. So I created learning objectives, but I made them more like a copywriter's headlines, like the thing you put at the top of a landing page
Great
or
idea.
at the
Right.
top of an article, where you're not giving it away, you're just arousing curiosity.
Hmm.
So there are ways to work with any given setting so that it approximates the cultural expectations of that of experience, that event. And I do encourage people to honor very firm guidelines as to how
Hmm.
a thing is supposed to happen.
Right.
Because if you become too much of a rogue, then again, that's the story in people's mind, that you're a rogue as opposed to, again, whatever it is you're there to share with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Great response. Great
Yeah.
information there. And I just try to be mindful that,
Of course.
we
Yeah.
have speakers in different arenas. So I want to make sure,
Yeah.
we make this information practical for everyone.
I
I,
do
I
want to
really,
say, Mo, that the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules.
this
Someone
is
like me
true.
can
This
come
is true.
along and have guidelines or ideas or techniques, and it
Yeah,
doesn't mean that it's universally better than everything else that's out there. Every
absolutely.
situation does warrant its own reflection.
And I like too that in your example of what you did, that you just tweaked it. You stayed within the lane, but you
Yeah.
just moved it a little bit to present it in a different way, which for someone like me, that would be engaging. Like, oh, look how he did his objectives. I'm gonna
Yeah.
lean in and listen, because he's
What
he's
is he
coming at me
talking
a little
about? Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's another thing for you burgeoning speakers is that you can do it in just a little bit different way, but still stay within the expectations and not offend anybody, which is really the big thing if you're being
Yeah, of
brought in
course.
to speak. And if you don't know, you can just ask or come early and listen to other speakers, but you want to make sure you're informed about the organization and the group so that you can really accomplish your mission there.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
before we sign off, I have this question, which was given to me by one of our listeners. In today's world, especially in leadership roles, being heard can be challenging. What advice do you have for someone trying to claim their seat at the table and
Mm.
have their message engage and impact?
What I will say, Mo, is well, the simplest way to be heard
Mhm.
relates back to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to an elevator pitch. I gave you a 4-part framework for an elevator pitch that started with identifying the problem that people
Mhm.
want to solve. The truth is that people are most likely to embrace a solution or an idea or a thought process when it's provided within the context of a problem they care about solving.
A
And so
problem
if
they care about solving.
they
Let me
care
repeat
about
that. Not
solving,
not a problem you've identified, but a
right,
problem
right.
they
Well,
care about.
exactly. I often have my speaking clients start with the problem that the audience cares about and then go beneath the surface of it and
Mhm.
diagnose what's happening beneath the surface so that it reframes the problem, but it's meeting them where they're at. And so if you're in an executive meeting, for example,
Mhm.
and you don't typically get listened to, if you think about what is it that this person I'm trying to influence cares about solving, and you frame it in that way, and then you basically provide the breadcrumbs that get to your thinking, your way of looking at the problem or your solution, they're going to come along. If you do it well, they're going to come along for the ride because you started with where they're at. Everyone cares about some sort of problem. When they wake up in the morning and they trudge to the bathroom, I call this the trudge to the bathroom test. When you wake up in the morning and you trudge to the bathroom groggy and stiff and regretful of not getting good enough sleep, you start thinking about the things that are on your mind, that the problems you have to solve that day, whether in your
Mhm.
work or your personal life. If you can tap into that, that's going to get people to perk up and listen for sure.
I like that. I like that. I love this whole conversation. I wish
Yeah.
we could talk longer, but uh, time is limited, and I definitely want to have you back because are really providing some really good information that will help people in almost any industry at any level, and I really respect that and how you put it into this awesome book. And I want other people to know more about you, download your book, order your book. So please tell listeners where they can get your book and how to
Mhm.
find you online and learn more about you and your services.
You can, of course, find the book where it's sold online, such as Amazon and Barnes and Noble, as well as
Mhm.
other online retailers. The book is called The Most Powerful Sentence of All Time. And in terms of going a little deeper into the work and even finding some free value, you can go to my website. There's a choose your own adventure video on the homepage where you can learn all about whether it's speaking or writing a book or getting momentum in your business or helping mission-based work like nonprofit work, as well as an opportunity to opt in and get some speaking tips and all sorts of things. So my website is neilcanhelp.com, neilcanhelp.com. And either that or the book is a good place to start.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Neil. And thank you, listeners. Please like, subscribe, and share to help us grow and spread this wonderful information every week. I've got great experts from all over the world to help you grow up and glow up. Remember, your words and actions have power. Use them to heal, build, and to inspire. And never forget, change your words, change your world. Thank you.